She ran outside ready to scream at him. Then she froze, because the man she hired to pull weeds was helping her amputee daughter stand on one leg for the first time. Alice Scott wasn't supposed to be home yet. Drained from a grueling boardroom ambush and emotionally threadbare, she steps into her quiet, glass-paneled hallway, only to halt mid-step. Laughter. Clear, high-pitched, unmistakable. Lorraine's laughter. The sound slices through Alice like a lightning bolt, beautiful, impossible, and utterly real. Heart racing, she rushes outside, and stops cold. There, in the middle of the lawn, bathed in gold sunlight and determination, is Lorraine, her 6-year-old daughter, the child who hasn't tried to stand, let alone walk, in nearly a year, balanced on crutches, shaking, focused, gritting her teeth. She shifts her weight to her one remaining leg, and behind her, in yellow gloves and worn denim, is Steve Thompson, the gardener, kneeling like a sentinel. His hands hover near Lorraine's back, not touching, not pushing, just waiting, guarding, whispering words Alice can't hear but somehow feels. Gentleness, intuition, purpose. Alice's breath catches. This is more than help. This is healing. A storm brews inside her, confusion, disbelief, jealousy that it wasn't her who brought Lorraine this far, and something else she hasn't felt in months. Hope. Lorraine takes a shaky step, wobbles, falls. Steve moves faster than thought, catching her with quiet strength. He lifts her up, steadying her again, like he's done this before, like he was meant to. Alice stares, silent. Who is this man? And what else has he been hiding? Before we dive in, make sure you hit subscribe, so you don't miss stories like this. Stories that will make you gasp, think, and believe again. Now let's dive back into the story. The first time Lorraine fell wasn't on the playground or a therapy mat. It was in her mother's arms. The night they told her she'd never grow a leg back. Alice still heard her scream sometimes in her sleep, sharp, wounded, small. For years old and folded in on herself, like she could vanish if she stayed quiet enough. Now 6, Lorraine didn't scream anymore. She didn't speak much either. The doctors had called it limb deficiency with delayed emotional adjustment. What Alice saw was her daughter slipping away behind a 1,000-yard stare and a silence too heavy for a child. Physical therapy became a battlefield. Every session ended with shaking hands, tears, or Lorraine locking herself in the bathroom. No progress. No trust. No hope. Alice had thrown everything she had at it. Money, experts, even a trip to Switzerland for a cutting-edge exoskeleton suit. Nothing reached Lorraine. Nothing worked. Not even her. The pressure cracked Alice's marriage first, then her own soul. She buried herself in boardrooms and business trips, pretending it was for Lorraine's future. But deep down, she just didn't know how to stay in a home that felt like failure. Some nights, she would sit in her parked car in the driveway and stare at the porch light, wondering if she even had the strength to walk inside. And then there was Steve, the gardener, the one man Alice had never once really seen. But Lorraine had. She remembered once, months ago, coming home early and finding Lorraine on the porch swing, her little arms wrapped around her stuffed bunny, her eyes quietly tracking Steve as he raked leaves beneath the maple tree. Alice had brushed it off. Just a child's gaze. Just a man doing yard work. She never noticed that Lorraine smiled that day. She never asked why. Now, standing in the aftershock of what she'd just seen on the lawn, those memories slammed back like a flood. How long had Lorraine been watching him? How long had she been letting him in when she'd shut everyone else out? Alice sank into the nearest kitchen chair and buried her face in trembling hands. "Lord," she whispered, her voice cracked with exhaustion. "I don't know how to reach her. I don't even know where I lost her." She hadn't prayed in months. maybe longer, maybe since the amputation. A verse surfaced, uninvited but familiar. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 147 verse 3. Alice choked out a breath. Was this healing? Was that what she saw today? Not from a doctor, not from a program, from a gardener in yellow gloves. She looked out the window, and there they were again, Lorraine in his arms, laughing at something he'd whispered. It felt holy. Like God had shown up in the place. She stopped looking. Alice stood slowly, heart pounding with something like hope, and something else she didn't want to name yet. She had to know more. She had to know who Steve really was. Alice didn't remember crossing the lawn. One moment, she was inside, watching from behind glass. The next, her heels were sinking into the damp grass, her voice already rising. How dare you touch my daughter without permission? Steve turned his head slowly, standing to face her. He didn't flinch. She could have fallen. Alice snapped. Her heart pounded hard enough to blur her vision. She's not a toy for you to experiment on. Steve didn't speak right away. He simply looked at her, those steady, unreadable eyes beneath the sun-faded ball cap. She asked me, he said, calm but firm. Lorraine wanted to try. Alice folded her arms. She's 6. Children want a lot of things they don't understand. It's our job to protect them. Steve's jaw worked for a moment. He glanced down at Lorraine, who stood gripping her crutches, her small chest rising and falling in quick breaths. I wasn't going to let her fall, he said quietly. Alice took a step closer, her voice sharp. And just how do you know how to teach a one-legged child to balance, Mr. Thompson? Did they start offering that with hedge trimming? She hadn't meant to be cruel, but it came out sharp and hot, the way fear always did. Something flickered in Steve's eyes, a quiet sting. I wasn't always a gardener, he said. Silence. Lorraine looked up at her mother, eyes wide and wet. Mommy, her voice was soft but clear. I wanted to try. Alice turned toward her daughter, heart twisting. He makes me brave, Lorraine whispered. The words landed like a punch in Alice's chest. She blinked, stunned. Lorraine hadn't spoken with that much emotion in months, maybe longer. The confidence in her daughter's voice was louder than her own anger, and deeper than her fear. Alice looked at Steve again, her mind racing. Who was this man? What secret was buried beneath soil and sweat and gloves that didn't quite hide the way he steadied her daughter like he'd done it 100 times before? Her world had tilted, but her pride scrambled to find footing. I still don't appreciate being kept in the dark, she said, softer now, but still guarded. You work for me. This crosses a line. Steve nodded. No defense, no anger, just something resolute in his face that unnerved her more than anything. I understand, he said, but Lorraine doesn't belong in the dark either. That stopped her. Lorraine squeezed her crutches. Can Steve still help me? Alice stared at her daughter, really saw her, the color in her cheeks, the light in her eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. Tears pricked the edges of Alice's vision, and yet her walls wouldn't fully crack. Not yet. We'll talk about it, she said, almost to herself. She turned back toward the house, the edges of her emotions fraying. Behind her, she heard Lorraine's small voice ask Steve, "Are you mad at my mommy?" And Steve's gentle reply, "No, sweetheart. Grown-ups just forget how to be scared out loud." Alice paused, halfway to the door, shaken. She wasn't ready to admit it, but something about that man wasn't ordinary, and something in her heart had just shifted. The house was quiet, too quiet. Alice sat at the edge of her bed, staring at her phone like it might disappear if she blinked. Lorraine had fallen asleep without protest tonight. That alone had sent a wave of both peace and guilt crashing over her. But it wasn't just Lorraine's laughter echoing in her mind. It was Steve's words. I wasn't always a gardener. Lorraine doesn't belong in the dark either. Grown-ups just forget how to be scared out loud. She exhaled and opened her contacts. His number was buried in the employee directory, saved under groundskeeper, Steve T. Her thumb hovered, then tapped. Hello. His voice came through low, calm. Not surprised. Just ready. Hi, it's Alice, she said, suddenly unsure what to do with her voice. Do you have a minute? A pause. Of course. She looked down at her hands, twisting in her lap. I need to understand who you are. Really. She met him outside by the patio, under the stars. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and soil, his world. Steve didn't sit until she did. Alice clasped her hands. What you did with Lorraine today. I've never seen her like that. Not since the surgery. Not even before. He nodded slowly. She's stronger than she knows. Alice looked at him, searching. You said you weren't always a gardener. Steve looked up at the sky, then back at her. His voice, when it came, was steady but heavy. I used to work in pediatric rehab, he said, out in Oregon, specialized in limb loss and mobility retraining. Alice blinked, but I didn't learn it in school. I learned it from my brother. He leaned back slightly, eyes distant. Marcus. He was born with a severe congenital deficiency. Same diagnosis Lorraine has. He lost his leg when he was 5. A breath. I was 13. Alice said nothing, letting the silence honor the weight. We spent most of our childhood in therapy centers and hospital waiting rooms. I learned how to wrap compression sleeves before I learned to drive. I built obstacle courses in the backyard just to keep him moving. His voice cracked slightly, but he kept going. Marcus died at 14. Infection. Too fast to stop. I couldn't save him. A pause. Wind moved softly through the trees. I tried to stay in the field after that. But the grief. He looked down. It hollowed me out. Medical bills ruined my family. I lost everything. My home. My career. I couldn't face another hospital. He looked at Alice then, eyes clear. I took the first job I could find. Gardening. It was quiet. Simple. Honest. A tear slipped down Alice's cheek before she could stop it. Steve didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he was too kind to say. I know how to help kids like Lorraine, he said gently, because I loved one. Alice couldn't speak. Her heart felt cracked open. All the judgments she'd made, all the assumptions. They sat like stones in her chest now. I misjudged you, she whispered. Steve offered a soft smile. I've been misjudged before. And for the first time in years, Alice felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not fear, not anger, but grace. At first, Alice watched from the upstairs window, behind the curtain, just far enough to stay invisible. Steve arrived every morning before the sun fully rose. No fanfare, no coffee in hand, just steady, quiet presence, like the morning dew, like faith. And every morning, Lorraine was waiting for him, not coaxed, not bribed, waiting. It stunned Alice, honestly, how natural it all seemed, as if Steve belonged in their lives far more than any specialist ever had. He never raised his voice, never rushed. When Lorraine stumbled, he didn't correct her like the therapists used to. He encouraged her, gently adjusting a foot here, a crutch there. He repurposed gardening tools, rakes, stakes, even a bag of soil, to help Lorraine balance, pivot, stretch. She called them her leaf lessons. Alice felt something tighten in her chest the first time she heard her daughter laugh through a set of makeshift lunges between 2 overturned flower pots. It wasn't the giggle she used when she watched cartoons. It was the deep, belly kind that meant she felt free. Alice couldn't remember the last time she'd seen her smile like that. And it wasn't just the exercises. Steve saw Lorraine, spoke to her like she was whole, not broken, not fragile, not a list of diagnoses. Lorraine responded like a flower turning toward the sun, blooming under the warmth of belief. And Alice, she started feeling like the outsider in her own child's world. At first, shame whispered cruel things. You were too busy, too angry, too absent. You missed all of this. But another voice began to rise, quieter, but steadier. Watch. Learn. So she did. And then, one morning, she opened the sliding door. Steve looked up, surprised, but only nodded. Lorraine beamed. Mommy, come watch me hop. Alice stepped barefoot into the grass. That day, she didn't stand behind the glass. She stood beside her daughter. And when Lorraine stumbled sideways on one crutch, Alice instinctively moved, but Steve gently caught her eye. Let her find her footing, he said softly. Alice hesitated. Her instincts screamed to help, but Steve's voice was calm. You don't need to push her, Miss Scott, he said. You just need to believe with her. Something in Alice's chest loosened. Lorraine straightened herself, grinning like she'd just conquered Everest. And for the first time in years, Alice didn't feel like she was failing her daughter. She felt like she was walking with her. After the session, Lorraine sprawled on the grass beside Steve, sweaty and happy. Alice knelt beside them, brushing a leaf from her daughter's hair. Thank you, she said, her voice rough. Steve didn't reply right away, just looked at Lorraine, then back at Alice. Belief changes everything, he said. That night, Alice opened her Bible, the one collecting dust on a nightstand, and whispered a prayer she hadn't dared to say in a long time. God, maybe you didn't abandon us. Maybe I just stopped watching. And outside, in the silence of the yard, hope kept growing, slow, steady, and rooted deep. The morning started like all the others, with promise. The sun stretched soft and golden across the lawn. Lorraine was already outside, gripping her crutches, determination written across her little face. Steve smiled at her. You ready? She nodded. Race you to the rose bush. Alice watched from the patio, arms crossed, heart hovering somewhere between hope and nerves. She had begun to trust these mornings, to believe that maybe this was the start of something good. But then it happened. A single slip, a patch of wet grass, and a sound no mother forgets. Lorraine's crutch slid out from under her. She cried out, a sharp, panicked wail, as her body crumpled to the ground. Lorraine. Alice bolted forward. Steve had already dropped to his knees, cradling her carefully. I've got you, he murmured. Just breathe, sweetheart. Lorraine clung to him, sobbing. Alice reached them seconds later, her hands trembling. What happened? She snapped. What did you do? Steve looked up, calm but clearly shaken. She slipped. I had her. No, Alice said sharply. This is exactly why I didn't want you near her. She could have broken something. She didn't. You don't get to decide what's safe for my daughter. Steve stood slowly, Lorraine still in his arms. I would never hurt her. Alice pointed to the gate with shaking fingers. You're done. Go. You're fired. Steve froze. Miss Scott. I said go. The words cut through the morning like glass. Lorraine's eyes went wide. No, she cried, her voice cracking. Mommy, please don't take Steve away. Her whole body trembled. He believes I can walk. And there it was. The truth. Not the therapy. Not the progress. Not the training. It was the belief. Steve slowly set Lorraine down on a blanket, then stepped back, hands at his sides, like a soldier who knew he'd already lost. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Then he turned and walked away. Alice stood frozen, heart pounding, every breath too loud. Lorraine didn't speak again that day. She didn't ask for her crutches. She didn't look out the window. She just curled up on the couch and held her stuffed bunny like it was the only thing left in the world that hadn't walked away. That night, the silence in the house was deafening. Alice sat at the kitchen table long after the lights were off, staring into the dark. Her hands were clenched in her lap. Her mind repeated the same scene over and over. The fall, the scream, the heartbreak in Lorraine's voice. "He believes I can walk." Tears spilled down Alice's cheeks before she could stop them. She buried her face in her hands and whispered the prayer she didn't want to say. "God, what have I done?" No answer came, only silence. But even in the silence, guilt echoed loudest. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. Alice hated it already. Lorraine sat quietly beside her, one crutch resting across her lap, the other in her hands. She didn't ask why they were there. She didn't ask much anymore. Alice could barely look at her. Dr. Hampton, one of the top pediatric orthopedic specialists in the state, entered with a folder under his arm and a kind, clinical smile. "All right, let's see what we've got," he said, flipping through test results on a tablet. "Strength test data, balance progression, motor reflexes, Alice leaned forward. "Is something wrong?" "No," he said, glancing at Lorraine. "Something's very, very right." She blinked. "Excuse me." He turned the tablet toward her and tapped on a graph. "These improvements, especially in her hip stability and quad strength, this doesn't happen without serious, specialized intervention." Alice furrowed her brow. "I told your nurse we haven't resumed formal therapy yet." Dr. Hampton arched an eyebrow. "Then I'd love to meet whoever has been working with her, because they know exactly what they're doing." He scrolled through more notes. "Do you see this? Her left side compensation is nearly gone. Her core strength has doubled since her last visit. In 1 month." Alice swallowed hard. 6 months ago, she could barely stand without shaking. "Exactly," he said. "My team worked with her for half a year with barely measurable progress. This," he smiled and shook his head in disbelief. "This is remarkable." Alice's voice cracked. "Doctor, could she really walk again someday?" He paused, eyes warm. "With someone like that helping her?" "Yes, absolutely." Alice's breath hitched. The hallway suddenly felt too small, too quiet. Steve's face filled her mind, steady, patient, focused. The way he knelt beside Lorraine, like she was the most important person in the world, and she had fired him. Lorraine had begged her not to, and she let fear speak louder than love. The doctor kept talking, but Alice didn't hear him. She rose to her feet. "We need to go." "Everything all right?" he asked. "I need to fix something," she said, grabbing Lorraine's hand. "Right now." They stepped into the elevator, and Alice pressed the button like it might erase the past week. "Mommy." Lorraine's voice was barely a whisper. Alice knelt beside her, tears in her eyes. "Baby, I made a mistake," she said. "A big one." Lorraine looked down. "Is Steve gone forever?" Alice shook her head. "Not if I can help it." The elevator doors opened, and they rushed into the cold autumn air. Alice's heart raced with every step toward the car. For the first time in days, she didn't feel numb. She felt desperate, alive, moved, and somewhere deep inside, she prayed with everything she had. "God, if there's still a chance to make this right, please don't let it be too late." Steve's apartment was on the second floor of an aging brick walk-up on the quiet side of town. No gate, no garden, just a chipped mailbox with a faded label, S. Thompson. Alice hesitated at the door, her heart pounding. Laureen was waiting in the car, watching cartoons on her tablet, unaware that her mother was about to beg a man to return to their lives. She knocked. Moments later, the door creaked open. Steve stood there in sweatpants and a plain t-shirt, barefoot, blinking in surprise. "Alice, I know I have no right to be here," she said, voice already catching in her throat. "But I had to come." He stepped aside wordlessly, and she entered. The apartment was tiny, old linoleum floors, mismatched furniture, but clean, peaceful. And then she saw them. Dozens of photos lined the shelf above the small couch. Children in wheelchairs, kids with crutches, some mid-laugh, some mid-recovery. Drawings, letters, thank you cards. One frame held a photo of a boy with a prosthetic leg, grinning at the top of a jungle gym. Alice's hand flew to her mouth. "Marcus," Steve said softly behind her. "My little brother." She turned to him, eyes burning. "I had no idea." "I know." She sat slowly on the couch, her hand shaking. "I came to say I'm sorry." Steve didn't speak, just waited. "I was scared," she whispered. "I've lived in fear since the day Laureen lost her leg. Fear that I wasn't enough, that I'd never fix it, that I was failing her." Tears streamed down her face, and when I saw her fall, I snapped. "Not because of you, but because I knew, deep down, that I never believed in her the way you did, and I hated myself for it." Steve sat across from her, hands resting quietly on his knees. "I projected my guilt onto you," she said, "and I'm so sorry." He nodded, eyes kind. "I forgive you." Alice let out a breath that felt like it came from 5 years ago. But Steve added something, voice low and steady. "I didn't help Laureen because of a job, Alice. I helped her because she reminded me of someone I loved." That cracked something deep inside her. "I want you to come back," she said. "Not as an employee, as someone we trust, someone we need." She looked him in the eye. "I will support you, listen to you, and I will stop standing in my daughter's way." Steve was quiet for a long beat. Then he smiled. "I'd be honored." Laureen looked up from her tablet as the car door opened. When she saw him, her crutch clattered to the floor. "Steve." She threw her arms around him before he could kneel, burying her face in his chest, sobbing. "You came back," she whispered. "I promised I'd never leave you, didn't I?" Alice watched, hands pressed to her heart, and for the first time in a long time, hope didn't just return. It stayed. They trained in the mornings now, out on the lawn, under open sky, beneath God's patient sun. Steve coached with gentle firmness, never pushing too far, never letting doubt take root. Alice watched every session, sometimes joining, sometimes just praying silently from the porch. Laureen grew stronger by the week. Not just her leg, her spirit. Her voice grew steadier. Her smile returned in full bloom. She laughed. She joked. And sometimes, when Steve wasn't looking, she mimicked his posture like a little shadow, trying to become just as steady, just as kind. They did balance drills with overturned flower pots, built obstacle courses out of gardening stakes and hula hoops. They celebrated tiny victories, 1-second stands, longer crutch hops, the first time she caught herself without falling. And slowly, joy became routine. The girl who once gave up was becoming someone else, someone braver. Alice saw it, felt it, and every time she did, a quiet voice inside whispered, "He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds." Psalm 147 verse 3. She no longer doubted it. One afternoon, as golden light spilled across the lawn, Laureen looked up from a rest break, cheeks flushed and eyes wide. "I think I'm ready," she whispered. Steve looked at her. "You sure?" She nodded, biting her lip. Alice stood behind them, hands over her heart, barely breathing. Steve knelt in front of Lorraine, placing his hands gently on her crutches. "All right," he said softly. "You know what to do." Lorraine exhaled slowly. She planted the crutches, shifted her weight, lifted her single leg, and stepped forward. Once, then again, then a third time. She wobbled and fell, but Steve caught her before she hit the ground, steady and sure as always. Lorraine burst into tears, but they weren't sad. "I did it," she cried, clinging to him. "Steve, Mom, I really did it." Alice dropped to her knees beside them, arms wrapping around them both. She was sobbing too, unable to stop, laughing through the tears. "You did, baby. You really did." Steve pressed his forehead to Lorraine's. "I told you. You've had it in you all along." They stayed like that, wrapped in each other, held by something bigger than all of them. Not just progress, not just strength, but love, healing, miracle. Alice looked at Steve, voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for not giving up. On her. On us." Steve shook his head gently. "I didn't show up to save her, Alice. I showed up to remember what it feels like to believe again." She nodded, tears streaming. "You reminded me, too." In that moment, Alice Scott, billionaire CEO, fixer of all things, finally understood the truth no fortune had ever taught her. Sometimes the miracle doesn't come in a lab, or a boardroom, or a world-class clinic. Sometimes it comes in gloves stained with dirt, in quiet patience, in a gardener who once lost everything and chose to love anyway.
If this story touched you, like, share, and subscribe for more heart-changing stories. And never forget, miracles often come from unexpected places.